So, Brother Art, I recently got a little bit of pushback on one of the things I discussed in the Lost Symbol vlog with regard to the connection between the Knights Templar, the historic Knights Templar, and Freemasonry. And is it the beginning of Esoterica where you discuss the difference between the authentic and the romantic schools of thought when you come to Masonic history? And I basically say there is no real connection between the historic Knights Templar of the 13th and early 14th centuries and the Knights Templar or Freemasons of today. That was my statement. I stand by it as being true. You're the expert. What say you?
We have a statement in one of the Scottish Rite degrees that says that we don't mistake the symbol for the thing that it symbolizes.
Right. Big thing Pike has said many times.
Exactly. And I like to look at some of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction degrees as a parallel to this. They have a Prince of the Tabernacle degree, I believe it is, that has a Native American theme. And so by comparison, I'll say, you know, just because it exists in Freemasonry doesn't mean it actually has historical roots to the theme that's portrayed in the ritual itself.
So that's a long way of saying no, there's no connection.
Yeah, the best that I know there is not. The tradition of kind of chivalric tradition, I guess it is, in Freemasonry is an old one.
Sure.
There's evidence, I believe to the late 1730s, that there was a kind of a chivalric order in Masonry. The oldest ritual with which I'm personally familiar is called the Bern ritual. It's as in Bern, Switzerland.
Right.
And it dates to about 1740. And this kind of goes along with the tradition that was in the Old Scots Master degree from about the same period, 1740s, where there were knights that were in the Holy Land. They discover a secret and they become allied with Freemasonry. And, you know, we find this kind of a thing everywhere, the famous speech by Chevalier Ramsay.
Right.
But in these early traditions, they're not Templars. They're the Knights Hospitallers or Knights of Malta.
Right.
And it gradually changes, so that we find in other traditions like the Rite of Strict Observance or in the Swedish Rite more of a Templar theme. It's more of a romantic notion, of course. And so, again, you know, although we've adopted it, I don't see that there's any real historical evidence of that. It's a great story that, you know, fleeing the persecution, that they went to the Scottish Islands and that they mixed or found work as stonemasons and passed down some of their ceremonies and were working in secret. Again, it's a great story, but
no proof.
There's no real evidence of that. You know, the similarity is not equivalence. So two things can look similar, but they're not the same thing.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, just imagine if your wife had a twin.
Double your pleasure, double your fun.
Right.
You could get into a lot of trouble if you mistook the two of them, right?
Indeed.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, yes, there are things that are superficially similar, as there are in many fraternal organizations, but that doesn't mean that one came from the other, or they might have borrowed symbolism from it, which was certainly the case in Freemasonry. But as far as I know, no actual evidence. And there are going to be people that argue against that, saying, well, there's enough that we can connect the dots. And as we know, being here in Washington, D.C., when we look at the street plan, we can connect dots and make all sorts of things Masonic that are not.
Sure. And not every right angle on every street map in the United States of America is a Masonic square.
That's
it's
right.
Just not, it's not a thing. Nor is every 45-degree angle a compasses that are set to a specific degree. It's happenstance. When you build a street, that's the way they go.
Yeah, it's a lot of wishful thinking and projection of the person who's looking for those symbols. And again, you know, we look at our craft traditions and have craft masonry as being founded in Jerusalem by Solomon, Hiram, and Hiram. It's a story, guys. It didn't really happen that way. So it's the same kind of a thing. Just because you find the story in Freemasonry doesn't mean it's true. It's a symbol.
And just because it's not historically true doesn't mean it has no value. And the example I like to use is George Washington and the cherry tree. There's no actual evidence Washington ever chopped down his father's cherry tree and said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I did it," and so his father didn't whip him. And, you know, the lesson and our takeaway is that it's always best to tell the truth, even in bad circumstance. There's probably no chance that actually happened. It doesn't take away from the power that the story has to teach us something. And I think Freemasonry and the Knights Templar lessons that we are taught in Freemasonry, just because that didn't happen, doesn't mean we don't have something to learn from it.
Absolutely. In fact, the story they mentioned about Washington, if I'm not mistaken, it was invented by Parson Weems years after Washington died, so that he put that in this so-called biography. But in the case of Freemasonry, again, what we do is we use these examples to strive to improve our character so that we adopt the virtues that we see in the degrees. And if that means having this chivalric tradition, you know, this sense of nobility, doing the right thing, defending people that are weaker than us, you know, striving for the improvement of yourself and conquering, you know, a symbolic holy land, just like we strive to build King Solomon's temple within ourselves, that's great. But again, it's a symbol, it's not reality. So it was in reference to Star Wars, I think it was, is that Joseph Campbell said that myths are meant to be lived by, and looked at Star Wars as an example of a modern myth. And so Lucas was very familiar with what he was doing. He read The Hero with a Thousand Faces and put a lot of that hero's journey into the film. And that's kind of what we do in Freemasonry. We take things that are useful to the candidates or that would be useful as instruction in our lives, and we build a myth that we live by.
Well, we say Masonry is a system of morality veiled by allegory. That is the allegory. Those are the allegories.
That's right. Yeah, and it doesn't take away from anything from Freemasonry to say that there's not a historic connection, because the purpose of Freemasonry is instruction, after all. The validity of Masonry is, the proof is in the pudding. You know, if you put the recipe together, it doesn't matter whether it was really invented by your great-grandmother. If, you know, if that's a tradition, if your mom really invented the thing and it's great, okay, that's good enough.
The pushback that I got from one brother was that just because there's no clear evidence doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Maybe it means it's been deliberately obscured and we haven't found it yet. And we have very little evidence to tie the craft guilds of the early days to what we would call Freemasonry today. We don't have much evidence of that. We have very sparse evidence. So.
Actually, we have very strong evidence of that today. So there are a couple of really good books by Professor David Stevenson on the first Freemasons and the origins of Freemasonry. A Scottish, you know, looking at the origins of Freemasonry in Scotland there. So we have a lot of very strong evidence on those things now. So it's really not a matter of speculation. We can actually show from records that exist today that our early Masonic origins, at least for the ritual, are in Scotland. The oldest Masonic records going back to England, or the so-called, I shouldn't say really the records, but the old charges or Gothic constitutions. But trying to argue from a negative, that's something that's a fool's errand, really. That's like saying that you can't disprove, you know, that I've got $1 million in gold coins hidden somewhere in the building if there's no way to actually investigate that. You can't argue from a negative. I wish I had those gold coins. Right. But the point is you really can't do that. Historians have to argue on what we know, what evidence that we have. And history isn't always a series of links in a chain. Sometimes it is a network or a web that we have to look at evidence. But for the story of the Templars as being the founders of Freemasonry, there's really not that kind of evidence. It's just really not there.
Thanks for watching. Hope you'll share the video with a friend and subscribe to the channel. If you want to become a Freemason, click this video right here for a step-by-step guide. And if you're a Master Mason wanting to join the Scottish Rite, click that link to find out more.